Well, Felix Ogunmade joins us now. He's a legal practitioner. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you, sir.
Well, as sad as it may be, but bottom line is now how to get a solution out of this matter. But from your perspective, how do you read this scenario?
Well, I think the spate of strikes in the health sector has become very alarming. I think that's a very essential sector of the economy. Lives are at stake. I think that if strike will be called upon at any point in time, it should be seen clearly as the last option, and that every avenue to resolve whatever dispute is at stake has been explored. And more importantly, the public who suffers seriously from the strike should know there must be enough publicity, enough conviction of the people that strike is essential. The people should be, the people who suffer from it, mind you, the people who patronize the public health sector are the poor people.
Really?
They do not, essentially the poor people. Because rich men, people in government that we are fighting, can afford to travel abroad and seek medical attention.
Granted, do you think doctors will go on strike just for the sake of going on strike? Because if they go on strike, well, they're not earning money. What would be the point of learning all that and you can't practice, you can't earn a living as a professional?
I have deep respect for the medical profession. I would not think that they just go on strike for going on strike's sake. But what I am saying is that given the nature of the profession, given the nature of who takes their services, given the fact that lives are at stake and are going to be affected by strike, it must not be undertaken under frivolous circumstances.
Do you think this was frivolous?
I think so.
Why?
Because the reoccurrence of strike. In the last 10 years, nearly every year you have strike called in that sector. And at times
nearly every year?
Nearly every year.
When was the last one called?
About a year ago.
About a year
About a year ago. I understand that was several months of strike.
Do you know if they called it off or they suspended it? Or
I understand that it was suspended. I heard it was suspended.
Why did they suspend it? If you follow?
Certain resolutions must have been made between them and government. And that was why they suspended it. I agree that if agreements are reached, it must be implemented, given that it must be implemented. If it is not implemented, then they can go to the industrial court to enforce the agreement instead of following that.
So the industrial court in this particular instance will not only also be for government, it will also be for labor. Do you think that labor makes use of the industrial court as often as it should?
I don't think so, and I don't support that.
Well, we just heard from a labor union leader, Mr. Peter Esada, that they are beginning to lose confidence in the manner of injunctions being granted by the National Industrial Court. Do you think that could also be the reason why? Do you think the government has too much influence? I
don't think so. Generally speaking, confidence is not high in our judicial system. It affects all persons. They cannot say because of that, they are not going to explore that option. They are not going to say that it's wrong. If an agreement has broken down, you go to court to enforce it. You don't call a strike. That's what I mean. You can't just be calling strike upon strike, where there are other opportunities to explore.
In other words, you say the doctors going on strike was wrong.
I think so. I think so.
What's wrong with the strike?
Because lives are at stake. Lives are going to suffer.
You know, in everything, especially in philosophy, there's a first cause to everything. If lives are so important, shouldn't the government be the first to actually stop them from going on strike by doing the needful?
I agree with that. I do not spare government. I do not support a situation whereby doctors are not well paid or agreements reached with them are not being implemented. But what I am saying is that if there are other options that labor can explore, they must be explored. All
right, give us this scenario. Sorry, apologies for butting in there. If you have signed an agreement, or if you have a grievance against your employer, what do you do if you explore all options? and then they're not willing to back down. In that circumstance, if you were in their shoes, what would you have done?
You can call strike if all other options have been explored. And your
So
employer,
bottom line, they will still call the strike eventually.
they may call.
How do we sort this out now? Because we don't, the country, people, the public, as you say, the poor uses those facilities. They don't even want to see a situation where they go on strike in the first place. Now that we're at this point, what solutions would you proffer?
Well, I think that it is time to begin to tell government to be more responsible to labor. I also think that, especially, we are not talking about labor generally now. We are looking at the health sector, which is primary to the whole essence of your work here, my work somewhere. It's for life. It's for life to get better. We're looking for life to improve from time to time. So, if we take that into consideration, I think that the health sector needs to principally look at how best to go on strike if it becomes very, very important and essential, and there's no other thing they can do.
So it's not just about the health sector, but also about labor, exploring other options too before they actually go. You know, you've mentioned that you do not exactly support the strike by the doctor, but would you support the sack of the doctors because of the strike that they went on?
Well,
Wasn't that an extreme measure on the part of the government?
it's a very extreme measure, I must say. But I think it is done to arrest the implication of the strike. We know very well that strikes had been embarked upon before that led to the death of patients. So if they're going to paralyze the sector totally, if the government looks for a measure, I think it's justifiable. I think it's justifiable.
Do you think that now that they've sacked them, have they arrested the implication of the strike?
Has not. Well, it has, at least primarily. Before now, maybe a death would have occurred.
It has. If over 788 are laid off and less than 300 or 400, it arrests the situation.
I really think that at the end of the day, the issues will be resolved and maybe they should be absorbed. But we are looking at why was it done? Why was it done? It was done to arrest the immediate implication.
Has it solved the problem?
It has not. Definitely, it will not solve it automatically.
But now that this has happened, because I've also heard some doctors argue that in the first instance, you all talk about the Hippocratic Oath, the hypocrites, how he came about it. We're actually going on strike to even protect the Hippocratic Oath because we could not even live up to it in the present circumstance.
Well, I think it's just an argument for argument's sake. They have done something and they have to justify it. I think that is just it.
Because look at where it has
because they have embarked on strike, pressing for certain needs. It needs about themselves, and they've got to prefer arguments here and there to support the strike.
But have you looked at the procedure? You know, lawyers talk about a lot of procedure, process, and if there's an abuse of process, you could throw a case out of court. Have you looked at the procedure that both parties explored here before the government eventually sacked them to find out if something went wrong and how it should be corrected?
I understand that the reason that Lagos State government gives is that they issued queries to them which were not answered, and that based on that they decided to sack them. Well, I do not think that there's anything in the law that would stop an employer from issuing queries to employees. And if the employee decides not to answer the query, for me, I think it's an admission of guilt, which I think is the basis for government's action subsequently.
But we pointed it out, pardon me, we pointed it out previously. If I'm on strike, you give me a query, I'm not at work. You expect me to answer the query when I'm not at work?
I will expect you to answer it because you are still my employee.
Well, how do I get the query? How do I receive it, let alone answer it, when I have declared an industrial action?
Sorry.
Remember, both parties are disputing.
Have they said they did not receive the queries?
Sorry, there is a clarification there. Apparently, they said the doctors had come back from their 3-day warning strike when they received the queries. I don't know if anybody got a contrary testimony, but that was what was said about, you know, them going on strike, a 3-day warning strike, coming back, calling the getting a query, and then they now threatened to go on an indefinite strike action if the queries weren't withdrawn. But would you say that the government did not get enough notice in this particular instance?
Well, I do not know what length of notice was given to them.
What is the procedure? When you say that you've suspended a strike action, I mean, we've been told, do you have a contrary opinion? You've been told that if you suspend a strike action, you can just you can resume whenever it is that you want to, as opposed to when you actually call it off.
Usually it's a common thing. When labor goes on strike, they say they have suspended the strike. Usually they should end the strike definitely if agreements have been reached. But more often than not, they suspend the strike for technical reasons so that they won't have to start the process all over again.
So in this particular instance, I mean, you would say that the doctors, they suspended their strike action, they had given some notice, and they had resumed their strike action when they felt 13 months after we had signed this agreement, the promises, the agreements weren't being fulfilled. Don't you think that they were justified in that particular light?
I still do not think so, because, like I said earlier, the next thing is to seek enforcement of the agreement that was reached.
13 months is a long time to wait
It's
for an
enough.
agreement to be fulfilled.
It is enough time. I am not supporting government in this circumstance. So I agree that...
How long would you say that, a body should wait for government to fulfill its promises before it finally does what it said it would do originally?
No time at all. No time at all. But what I am saying is that an agreement has been reached. It's broken down. It's not being enforced by the other side. You go and enforce it.
No,
Go to court.
the state now. Or both parties go to court.
No, it's the aggrieved party who goes to court.
But
In this circumstance, it is the health sector.
because the response that the government gave concerning that query was that, well, we don't actually recognize the fact that they were on strike. And so we issued the query. So they assumed that they were supposed to be at work.
Yes.
Not even for the 3 days now, because it was when they went on indefinite strike that they said they issued the query expecting them to be at work at that time because they didn't recognize the indefinite strike in the first place.
Yes.
And people ask themselves, whose responsibility should it be to declare a strike illegal or otherwise, especially if both parties are in dispute here?
Well, I think the government just want to take a go at them at that.
No, whose responsibility should it be if both of us have a dispute, an industrial one?
Yes.
Can the other party say this is not correct and I act based on that?
Well, that's the downside of the story.
What do you think?
I don't think it's correct. I don't think it's correct. I don't think it's correct.
So if you were to go to court and, support any one of them, whose side would you be on?
Well, legally speaking, I will be on the side of government. Legally speaking, I will be on the side of government.
But you already know, I mean, we all know that government seems to be rather notorious in terms of failing to keep its agreement. What other tools are available? I mean, you mentioned the courts. We also know that the courts can be slow. If we've given at least 13 months, at the very least, this is over a year, for government to meet its own side of the agreement. How long again should we wait? I mean, this is short of going to the courts immediately after you sign an agreement will ensure that the government, to force the government to actually fulfill its own side of the, what other steps can we take?
Well, government needs to be, definitely government needs to be more responsible. Government should show how to be responsible to people.
So we just wait for government to become responsible?
13 months is rather long. 13 months is rather long. But my grasp is that the next thing to do by labor is not strike.
Well, part of the information coming through is that the enemy and the government are meeting on this matter. And at the moment, it's still deadlocked.
Yes.
And you say they should reverse.
People?
Well, the best thing in the circumstance that we find ourselves should be that the parties should return to the status quo.
Status quo ante? Or
Yeah, definitely. The labor should go back on strike. Government should restore their employment, and then negotiations should continue.
So you mean the strike action should still continue? I mean, for instance, now if the government rescinds its decision to strike, to sack the doctors, and they actually take him back into employment, you still believe that the doctors should be on strike while negotiations are going on?
I don't believe so.
You don't believe so?
I believe they should go back to work.
You believe they should go back to work while negotiations
Yes.
are going on? Okay.
Yes.
But, I mean, Mr. Sele talks about the implication of this matter. Because some think that the government actually glossed over it while they were taking their own action because he says the implication is that if this were allowed to stand, even if it was well intended, but the ultimate intention is that this will spread. States will rise up and do what they will. And of course, labor will not take that. Labor kicks in. And ultimately, the people continue to suffer.
Yes. Well, yeah, definitely the people will continue to suffer.
I mean, nationwide now, because you
Other
understand
states.
that the federal workers also are now on strike. And that's why if you go around the hospitals, you can't get certain kinds of treatments because consultants, you won't even find them in the first place. And so what happens?
That would be a state of calamity, and I think it's uncalled for. I will be calling on both government and the workers to resolve the issue.
Do you think that the government is paying enough attention to the health sector? I mean, it seems to be the norm now that, one of the things that we're saying is that with the doctors that are on strike now, they're not exactly affecting the lives of, it's not affecting the lives of government officials because if they need treatment, they go abroad. But should this be the norm?
I do not believe that government has done enough for the health sector. But I also know that the government has not done enough for nearly all sectors. So, should we now paralyze the entire economy?
In the priority of things, what should we be putting first? We know that a healthy workforce will be the ones to achieve whatever dream it is that we have for the health, for the country as it is. Shouldn't we prioritize some sectors?
The sector should be prioritized. But let us look at this strike. Is it because of facilities in the health sector or because of the interest of the doctors?